Just Being Audrey, written by Margaret Cardillo, illustrated by Julia Denos, and read by Mr. Alicea. More than anything, Audrey wanted to be a ballerina. She was too tall, her feet were too big, and her neck was too long. Still, Audrey danced on. She held fairy tale ballets in her yard, the trees and squirrels her audience. Audrey's brothers would tease her, always off in her own world. But her mother understood. It is just like Audrey to do her own thing. Audrey struggled with en pointe, dancing on her toes, but she loved a challenge. So she practiced more than all the other ballerinas in class. Some of the girls laughed at Audrey, saying her teeth were crooked and her eyes seemed too big for her head. Audrey knew she looked different, but it didn't matter much to her. She wanted only one thing, to be a prima ballerina of all of Europe. Her mother reminded her that there were more important things than fame. "Others matter more than you, dear," she said. "You must always be kind." When Audrey was 10 years old, World War II broke out in Europe. Her family fled to Holland, but the Nazi troops marched into the country and right up to the Hepburns' front door. Although her mother was a baroness, Audrey's childhood was turning out to be anything but noble. Her family and 40 other people hid in a small house in the country. There was no heat and little food. Supplies were quickly running out and people were starting to feel desperate. Despite everything, Audrey continued to dance. She took the children into the dining room to practice ballet routines. The dancers held performances to raise money for resistance troops. The audience could not clap for fear of being found, but the smiles on their faces told Audrey all she needed to know. One day, there was a knock on the front door, and everyone froze. Had they been discovered? But after years of bad news, there was finally something to celebrate. The war had ended, and volunteers from the United Nations had arrived, bringing food, clothing, and medicine. One volunteer gave Audrey a chocolate bar. She ate it so quickly she got a stomachache, but it was the most delicious thing she had ever tasted. Audrey never forgot that kind gesture. After the war ended, Audrey and her mother moved to London. They had very little money. In fact, Audrey had only a few blouses and skirts and one colorful scarf, but she could tie the scarf 20 different ways to make a new outfit every day. Audrey soon realized that her dream of being a ballerina was not going to become a reality. She was simply too tall, and no amount of practice could change that. She decided to try acting instead. She landed a few small roles. One took her to the south of France. Colette, the famous French writer, spotted Audrey. Colette needed an actress for the lead role in her play Gigi that was opening on Broadway in New York City. "C'est Gigi! It is my Gigi!" Colette announced. Surely Colette was mistaken. Audrey had no acting experience. "She has that je ne sais quoi, that certain something." With that, Audrey was on her way to Broadway. New York was very different from the countryside, but Audrey rehearsed so much she hardly noticed. To make up for her inexperience, she worked harder than anyone else. While Audrey was performing on Broadway, the movie director William Wyler was looking for a fresh face for his new Hollywood film. When he saw Audrey, he knew he'd found it. In the movie Roman Holiday, Audrey plays Princess Anne, who falls in love with a journalist. By the time the movie came out, everyone had fallen in love with Audrey. She even won an Oscar for her performance. Audrey went on to star in some of Hollywood's biggest movies, including Funny Face, Sabrina, and My Fair Lady. From a party girl in Breakfast at Tiffany's to a nun in The Nun Story, Audrey took roles that challenged her and she made them her own. Audrey often played characters who went through some kind of transformation, both inside and out. But in real life, Audrey always knew just who she was, and just where she had come from. Audrey had become more than an actress, she was an inspiration. While most Hollywood starlets were curvy and wore glamorous outfits, Audrey would only be herself. She was always slender, she wore her hair short, and her clothes were simple and elegant. It was such a different style that it got its own name, the Audrey look. And the very things that made her appear awkward as a child, they were precisely the things that made her beautiful as an adult. From Los Angeles to New York, Paris to Tokyo, there were imitations of her walking about town. Everyone wanted to be just like Audrey. She didn't behave like most movie stars either. She was always on time and studied her lines to perfection. After filming, Audrey would cook warm spaghetti dinners for the cast and crew. She was the kindest actress any of them had ever worked with. Audrey starred in more than 24 movies, but her dream role was being a mother. She spent her days with her sons Sean and Luca and tended her garden in the afternoons. She had never been happier. Once her children had grown, she decided to put her fame to good use. In 1988, Audrey became a Goodwill ambassador for an organization called UNICEF. It was the very same organization that had helped her as a child during the war. Audrey traveled all over the world bringing aid to children in need. Like with flowers, she said, it's the same with children. With a little help, they can survive and they can stand up and live another day. Her finest performance came in 1989. Audrey spoke to Congress to ask for help for all of the children she had met during her travels. I am here today to speak for children who cannot speak for themselves, she said. Every child has the right to health, to tenderness, to life. Her words were so moving and eloquent that people listened. Funding for UNICEF doubled, and she inspired fellow actors to join the movement. For her efforts, Audrey was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1992, one of the highest honors a person can receive. Audrey's life was not always a fairy tale, but she chose hope over sorrow. Her legacy remains. It is in the loveliness of her movies, in the kindness she showed others, and on the faces of the children she helped around the world. And if you look closely, you can still see the Audrey look about town.